What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's the Game Week 24 preview, so I'm going to go through some of your questions, starting off with chip strategy. So what should our chip strategies be with the new information about double Game Week 27, blank Game Week 28, and double Game Week 29? Now, to be fair, the only new information that's 100% confirmed is the mini double Game Week in Game Week 27, where Brentford, Brighton, Southampton, and Crystal Palace will all play twice. We know there's going to be blanks in Game Week 28, but they're not confirmed yet. We know there's the likelihood of a big double game week in Game Week 29, but again, not 100% locked in. We don't know what the fixtures are. So it's quite difficult to sit here and tell you exactly what the best chip strategy now is. Some people are talking about wildcard in Game Week 27. That would set you up for the mini double in 27 itself, the big double in 29, and also potentially allow you to bench boost. And to cover all that, if needed, you could then free hit in Game Week 28. That might be the best chip strategy, but there's also doubles in 34 and 37 to think about as well. Again, we don't know what those fixtures will be right now, and there's also going to be a blank in Game Week 32, which may be difficult to navigate, which I'll talk about later on. So it's impossible really to tell you what the best chip strategy is, but I don't want to just sit here and tell you it's difficult, so just move on, make your transfers and worry about it later. I want to talk about why that is, and also why people are now looking at the possibility of wildcarding in 27. So it's difficult to lock in a strategy until the next round of the FA Cup is complete. The next round to be played is the 5th round. We will find out we'll find out the Game Week 28 blanks between Game Weeks 25 and 26. So who's going to blank in 28 is based on who gets through the FA Cup 5th round, and that will be played between 25 and 26. So by the Game Week 26 deadline, we should know who's blanking in Game Week 28. But this does help us further as well, because it helps with the odds of who might blank in 32. Because the Game Week 32 blank is based on who gets through the quarterfinals in the FA Cup. And we won't know that by Game Week 26, but we'll know what the fixtures are in the quarterfinals, and that will give us an idea of who's odds on to get through to the round after that. So this is why I'm saying that more information is important before we start locking in which chip strategy we want to go for. We also don't know who is 100% doubling in Game Week 29, but we're going to talk about that now. So this is based on what Ben Crellin has been saying on Twitter, that likely to double in 29 is Liverpool, Brighton, Brentford, Leeds, Leicester, West Ham, Newcastle United and Man United. And then a possible double for Man City, Southampton, Aston Villa, Nottingham Forest, Chelsea and Spurs. So basically it's going to be a big double and there's going to be lots of extra fixtures. We just don't know with 100% certainty which fixtures there will be. Now the interesting thing there is on likely to double you've got Brighton and Brentford, and they are two of the teams that also double in 27, so you could go for 4 to 6 of their players on a wild card, and then straight away in Game Week 29 you'll have 4 to 6 of their players plus whoever else you want to go for. But those two teams are also very likely to blank in Game Week 28, so you might want a free hit. But Liverpool are also on likely to double, and it's not confirmed yet whether or not they will blank in Game Week 28. And if they don't, it might make it easier to not have to wildcard or to not have to use your free hit as well. Because I'm not completely against wildcarding and then into a free hit if it's going to get you a lot of extra points and later on is easy to manage, but that's not necessarily the ideal situation to use those chips. You don't want to necessarily use both one after another, but again, it might be the best strategy. We just don't really know yet. Also, double Game Week 27, you've got Man United on there. Now, to be fair, Man United have Southampton at home in 27, so if they also double in 29, that could be pretty nice to pick them back up on a wild card, but they're very likely to blank in 28, so that might force you into free hitting. So there's lots of things to kind of think about once these kind of fixtures are 100% locked in. When we're going to find out exactly who's doubling in 29, I do not know, but hopefully you would find out at least a few weeks in advance. Then we've got blank Game Week 28. So again, we'll know this before Game Week 26, but right now we know it's likely that Man City, Southampton, Brighton, Brentford, Leicester, West Ham, Spurs and Man United will all blank. And obviously that doesn't look great, but I still think it's quite manageable right now without a free hit. I think the addition of double Game Week 27 definitely makes the wild card more viable, but again, it's not something that you have to lock in right now. And the reason for that is the teams that are definitely playing include Arsenal. Lots of people have tripled up. Everton, lots of people are thinking about getting them in for bench cover. Crystal Palace, Bournemouth, maybe a little bit less of a worry because, yes, Crystal Palace double in 27, but their fixtures aren't great before that. Aston Villa, so some people are looking at getting a defender in, possibly Watkins, Leon Bailey for your bench as well. Nottingham Forest, again, not necessarily so much of an issue. Chelsea, a lot of you have got Kepa. Lots of people are looking at João Felix, possibly a defender as well. We're going to talk about them later on in the video. And obviously Newcastle definitely playing. Most people are not getting rid of Trippier, and people want to go back to double Newcastle defence as well. So there's quite a few teams that are playing in 28 where we've already got quite a few players. So if you free hit, you're not necessarily gaining a massive advantage. And it's also worth noting that one of Liverpool versus Fulham or Wolves versus Leeds will also be on, because Leeds and Fulham are playing in the FA Cup 5th round. They can't both get through to the next round. Now, if Liverpool and Fulham was on, and you've loaded up on Liverpool players in the double, that will be extremely helpful, and again may mean you don't need a free hit. For some of you, you might be looking at Wolves players for the double. You might have Gnonto or Meslier, for example, and if Fulham were to win in the FA Cup, that might help you out not needing to free hit in 28. And again, it just comes back to, this is why it's difficult to lock in a chip strategy, because everyone's teams are different and we don't know the results yet. My team, for example, these are the players that I've guaranteed got playing in Game Week 28. Obviously, if fitness and everything is okay. So Gabriel, Odegaard and Saka, my triple up from Arsenal. I've already got Tarkowski and Mings. So if Mings is fit, that's another player there. And Trippier, who I'm not going to sell for blank Game Week 25. So that's 6 players already for 28. If the Liverpool and Fulham game was on, I would also have Salah and Mitrovic. Without making any more transfers, I would have 8 players. I will also probably bring in another Liverpool player for Game Week 25 for the double. So that would be 9 players. Now, obviously, if Wolves and Leeds win and Leeds go through... if Fulham win in the FA Cup and that game is off, well, suddenly I've only got my 6 and then it's difficult to manage. I may need to free hit. But again, players like João Felix and Kepa are ones that I'm looking to bring in. So I think for a lot of people, blank Game Week 28 might not be that difficult to manage without a free hit, but yet people looking to wildcard in 27 would almost have to free hit in 28. So it might be the best strategy, but again, we can't say that right now. I know I've said that a lot of times already. And then you've got to look at blank Game Week 32. Now, this is based on, again, FA Cup results, so we don't know right now. But the interesting thing is, lots of big teams are playing each other. So even if a team is out of the FA Cup, like Chelsea, for example, they could still blank because Man United are still in the FA Cup. So if you look at this fixture run, Arsenal play Southampton. We've all got triple Arsenal. Southampton are still in the FA Cup. Now, to be fair, they're probably not as likely to go through as maybe a Man United or a Man City to the round that would affect Game Week 32. But if they do, then Arsenal would be off. We lose our triple Arsenal straight away. Brighton and Man City, that game is very likely to be a blank. So we're talking about wildcarding in kind of 4 to 6 Brighton-Brentford players, but you might lose all your Brighton players for that game, as well as Haaland. Some of you might have Mahrez. I've got Edison right now, although he will hopefully be gone soon, etc. So that game will probably be off as well. Leicester are still in the FA Cup, so that Wolves fixture is not guaranteed to be on. Liverpool and Nottingham Forest will be on, right? Because Liverpool and Forest are both out of the FA Cup, so that's interesting. Newcastle out of the FA Cup, but they've got Spurs who are still in it, so that game could be off. So you could lose Harry Kane, Trippier, your second Newcastle defender, etc. And obviously Man United, Chelsea, we're talking about how good Chelsea are for Game Week 28 because they might have a double in 29. But if you've got Kepa, João Felix and maybe a defender as well, and Man United get through, you lose all those 3 plus Rashford, and maybe some of you will still have Luke Shaw. So Game Week 32 might be really difficult to manage based on what happens in the FA Cup and the next round of fixtures. But again, we can't say for sure right now what that will look at. Now you might think, well, if that many fixtures are off, why would I even want to free hit? But sometimes it's not that bad to free hit in a week like that to get a bunch of players you wouldn't usually own, because if you hit one that does really well, there's at least enough upside there. Plus, it's not just about the points you get in the week you free hit, it's about the points you get outside of that. So if you can hold on to Brighton players who are looking good, Man United players that have got good single game week fixtures, you know, your likes of Haaland, maybe your triple Arsenal, etc., you're getting a lot of points outside of the blank and you're only free hitting in it to deal with. So yeah, I think coming back to the question, what should our chip strategies be? Right now, I do not know, right? And I think before we get to game week 26, we'll have more of a clue. What I'm generally trying to do is not overcommit. So it's probably the reason I won't go for triple Liverpool. It's why I've recently bought in Mings. It's why I've recently bought in Tarkowski. It's why I'm looking at possibly bringing in Pickford for Edison as well, because I know those players let me hedge my bets, or at least they will definitely play in certain blank game weeks as well. And I think that's all we can do at the moment. So triple Liverpool would be great if they were guaranteed to play in 28, but they're not. And if you do triple up on them, which I know most people aren't thinking about, but if you did, that might force you into using a chip that you don't want to use. So I guess the key is not to overcommit and go for Chelsea that are definitely playing in 25, 28, Everton that are definitely playing in 25, 28 and 32, and essentially try and roll your transfer as much as possible. If you can roll it into 25 and then get out 11 and roll a transfer into 26, that's probably the ideal situation. It's very difficult for most of us. I know that I'm going to have to use my 2 free transfers in 25, but if you can do all of that, that's probably the best thing to do. And then hopefully by 26 we'll have a better indication of what kind of chip strategies we should be looking at. Alright, so which defenders to go for? Is it really worth considering Wolves or Everton defenders when you can get Chelsea defenders to cover the blank game weeks? And the answer is yes, they are worth considering, because there's more to think about than just who is the best defence. And don't get me wrong, the Chelsea defence is better than Wolves and Everton. I'd much rather have Reece James than James Tarkowski, but there is more to it than that. So I've put this together. Everton will definitely play in blank game weeks 25, 28 and 32. They might not always have the best fixtures. For example, in game week 28 they played Chelsea away, but they will be able to cover you in all those weeks. And someone like James Tarkowski, he looks pretty nailed right now and he's cheap at 4.2 million. So whichever defender you're looking to bring in to cover the blanks, it's not necessarily someone that you're going to have to play every single week. I've got Mings for blank game weeks 25 and 28 and Tarkowski as well, and most of the time they're just going to sit on my bench. I'm not going to play them all the time. Obviously with Chelsea, you've got a better defence. They also play in 25 and 28, which is nice. They've got Spurs and then Everton at home in 28. Game week 32 is not guaranteed because of Man United, which I already spoke about. Again, we might not need to worry that far down the line. We may well have wildcarded before that, but it's just something to consider. But obviously they're more expensive, right? And can we rely on the minutes? Now, on the expensive part, if you're buying someone like Reece James, or Badiashile, right, because that's another defender people will be looking at, I feel like there's someone that you're going to want to play most weeks, so they're taking the spot of like an Arsenal defender, maybe a Trippier, although obviously Newcastle's fixtures are Liverpool, blank, and Man City, so not necessarily ideal. A Man United defender, but again, they blank in 25. They're taking that kind of spot. They're not really taking a bench spot, unless you've got a structure where you've got more money to spend on those positions. So that's one thing to think about. But also, can we rely on the minutes? Reece James is someone that has been frustrating for a lot of FPL managers, I would say, where he doesn't always necessarily make it to 60 minutes. He's been quite injury prone. Champions League is also starting back up. I don't know if I can sit here and tell you that Reece James is going to play every single game in the league. And a lot of people will point towards Badiashile because he's not in the Champions League squad. And that might well be the Chelsea defender to go for because he's only around 5 million. But if they've got an important Champions League game coming up and Graham Potter wants to make sure that his partnership for that game is ready, he might play them in the Premier League, which means Badiashile would miss out. Now, for what it's worth, I think he's a good pick, and I think it's worth the risk for 5 million, but it's just something to think about. And he's a player that you would want to play most weeks. So again, if we look at my team. Now for this week, because I've not dealt with Ake yet, I'm probably going to have to play Tarkowski. But when I do deal with Nathan Ake and I bring someone else in, like possibly Trent Alexander-Arnold for double game week 25, most of the time this is going to be my defence. So if I get a Chelsea defender in, I've either got to find the money to upgrade one of these two, or I've got to replace one of these three. Again, ignore the fact it's Ake, that will be someone different. Maybe bringing in Reece James or Badiashile is the better option than going for Trent, right? That's something to think about. But these are not the bench spots are not usually the ones that they're taking. So I really like Chelsea defence if they can fit into your squad. But again, it's not quite as simple as just saying they are outright better than Everton players, therefore you should go for them. Okay, it's all going to depend on your team. With Wolves, The only guarantee is that they play in blank game week 25, where they, of course, have a double game week like Everton. The game week 28 versus Leeds is going to depend on who wins out of Fulham and Leeds in the next round of the FA Cup. We won't know that until game week 26. They also play Leicester away in game week 32, so that fixture is not guaranteed to be on either. So they don't cover the blanks as well as Everton, although they do have cheap players like Kilman who look to be nailed at just 4.3. My main worry with Wolves is they might just be good in the short term, and that is it. Because if you look at their fixtures really quickly here, just go to any of their players. Bournemouth at home, good fixture. You bring a Wolves defender and you can definitely play them. I think having 2 away games to Fulham and Liverpool is not necessarily ideal for clean sheets, right? When you got to play, I know Mitrovic hasn't done well recently, and obviously up until the Everton game, Liverpool would look really poor as well. But I wouldn't be expecting 2 clean sheets. They might get 1. An outside push, but I don't think they can get 2 there. And then they run into Spurs, not great. Newcastle away, not great. This fixture's not guaranteed to be on. 29 Nottingham Forest away is okay. 30 is against Chelsea, not great. 31's against Brentford. If Tony's still playing, then that's not necessarily great either, although it is a home game, so it might not be too bad. And then the Leicester game's not guaranteed to be on. So I don't think, unless you're committing to an early wildcard like in game week 27, I just don't think that Wolves defenders help enough people. So I would either be looking at Chelsea or Everton defenders, and I think someone like Tarkowski, who I've already got in, just looks pretty good. But yeah, coming back to the question, is it really worth considering them? Yes, for many different reasons, and it's going to be very team dependent. Obviously, all this talk about the double in 27, the blank in 28, etc. is kind of forgetting there's also a blank and double game week in game week 25 as well. So who would you rather sell, Shaw or Trippier? I think if you're going to sell one of these two, it's probably still got to be Luke Shaw, despite him doing really well in game week 23. And obviously, he does have Leicester at home in game week 24, so that's not too bad. But both of these teams blank in 25, and Man United are also pretty likely to blank in game week 28 as well, whereas Trippier isn't. And I think a lot of people have probably got value tied up in Trippier more so than Luke Shaw as well. So if we have a quick look at their fixtures, I've actually sold Luke Shaw last week, which obviously now looks like a big mistake. But Leicester at home is pretty good, although I would always expect Leicester to score, even if they're not going to win the game. But it is at home, and Man United defence has improved massively. So not a bad fixture for Luke Shaw. And we know that if he plays left-back, he's pretty attacking as well. Blank in 25. Liverpool away doesn't look great. Southampton at home is pretty decent, but this game is likely to be off. Now, to be fair, it's not like Trippier's run is amazing either. Liverpool at home, again, Newcastle might win that game. I think they're going to concede at least 1. Doesn't mean I think Liverpool are going to go and score 3, 4, 5 goals. Absolutely not. It's going to be a tough fixture. But Newcastle can definitely concede in that game. Although, if you look at the expected goals conceded numbers per 90 minutes this season, Newcastle are now the second best defence. So I wouldn't put it past them to get a clean sheet. I am going to play Trippier this week. Then they got a blank. I think Man City away is much tougher. I can't see a clean sheet there. But then they've got Wolves at home, which is decent. And then Nottingham Forest away, which is guaranteed in game week 28, which again is going to be a blank for a lot of teams. So I think you've got to trust Trippier over Luke Shaw, even though in the individual single game week fixtures they have, Luke Shaw could be just as good. But this is just the reality of blank game weeks. It gets frustrating because sometimes you have to remove players you like and buy players you don't really like. That is just FPL at this time of the season. So yeah, if I'm going to sell one of these, I've already done it really. I'm going to sell Shaw before Trippier. All right, let's talk about Mo Salah. So for a non-Salah owner, would you try and get him in this week or wait for next week's double? Also, do you think it would be worth getting him in for a -4 hit if you were to get him in game week 25? So just on the first point, there's no rush to get Liverpool players in this week. I think in certain situations, right, depending on your transfer strategy, it might be worth doing it. Like if you've got De Bruyne and you're worried about his minutes for game week 24, you could switch to Salah. If you're looking to shift funds around and as part of that you're buying a Liverpool player, then fair enough. But you don't need to rush to get them in for Newcastle away. That is a difficult fixture. I don't think it's completely crazy to suggest that Liverpool could score in that game because the Liverpool attack just has been generating a lot of chances even if they haven't been scoring a huge amount recently. But of course Newcastle could get a clean sheet. So if you've not got Salah, I don't think you need to panic until... I don't think you need to panic at all, but if you want to get him, it's probably game week 25 instead of game week 24. In terms of the hit, that really depends. I guess if you were going to captain him, you could justify that. Whether or not you should captain him is obviously completely up to you. Some people might think that he's just the outright best captain, that he's a better option than Saka, Odegaard, etc. Some people might want to do it for differential reasons because his ownership's still going to be pretty low and a lot of people are going to be put off captaining him. Whatever the reason is, if you're going to captain him, a -4 hit might be okay. It could also be worth it anyway, right? Because as I've spoken about a lot over, you know, the last week or so, Liverpool players that are an all-time low in terms of people's expectations. And while I think the goal against Everton, the 3 bonus, the 11 points is going to help in terms of people wanting to bring him back, I still think it's going to be much lower than usual. So it might be worth paying a 4-point hit for a differential that we know what he's capable of. Like, the idea that he is finished is absolutely crazy. Yes, he's had a poor season by his standards. He is not, you know, done enough to warrant his price tag, but we're only really worried about going forward and what can a player like Salah do in game week 25 against Crystal Palace and Wolves. That could be a big haul. So I'm not against the -4 in general. The only thing to kind of consider with him is that fixture in 28 is not guaranteed, but you could look at it as I'm taking a -4 for a pretty good double game week. Okay, Man United's quite tough, but at least Liverpool are at home. Then they've got Bournemouth, and then there's an outside shot that game week 28 will be on as well, and then it's Fulham at home, which is another good fixture. I think that is probably worth a -4 for Salah, even if you don't end up captaining. Whether or not it's worth taking, you know, lots of other hits for Liverpool players, probably not, right? I will probably bring in one more, but for free. I don't think I'll be looking to take loads of hits to kind of get to a triple up, but who knows? We'll decide that in game week 25. But for most of you who are now, you know, looking at the fact Liverpool might have looked a bit better against Everton, Salah scored, you now want him, I don't think there's any rush whatsoever to get him for game week 24. So Mitrovic has no return since game week 19. With blank game week 25 on the horizon, we just can't seem to let him go. Has Mitrovic now become the Weghorst of last season? I think that last point is a little bit harsh. It has been extremely unfortunate to own Mitrovic, right? Because in the last game, he actually played pretty well, had quite a few shots as well. His expected goals were decent. Again, no goal came with that. He's missed 2 penalties, as we know. He got a yellow card in the first game of the double, so he lost a point for that. He also came out with no bonus points because of it, and he missed the second game. So there's been a lot of unfortunate circumstance, but I think the idea of him being Weghorst just because we're holding on to him for the blank is not necessarily fair, and this comes up every single season. I actually spoke about this last week before Solly March and Tony returned this week, how people start to say things like, well, you've ignored all these players who have done well because of the blank. That was a bad move. And before game week 23, the main player was Mitoma, right? He'd done really well in the previous 2 weeks, so people started saying you shouldn't have ignored him because of the blank. And my point was, great, but we've also ignored March, who hadn't returned in those 2 games. We also ignored Tony, who hadn't returned in those 2 games. And these things happen, right? So is it wrong to be holding on to Mitrovic because he plays in game week 25? I don't think it is. It's more valuable right now to hold on to him than it would be if there were no blanks or doubles. So let's say from now until game week 30, no blanks, no double game weeks whatsoever, the case to sell Mitrovic would be much higher. Although obviously, as far as we know, he is still on penalties. Hopefully he'll score the next one. He is nailed on. He is going to play for 90 minutes or close to most games. He's still a good option, but it would be more valuable to sell him, or more justifiable, I guess, if there were no blanks. But there is, and we have to take that into account. So when I look at my team, for example, right, and I know I always use it as an example, but it's just the easiest way to explain. I'm looking at Mitrovic there. Do I think he's likely to get loads of returns against Brighton, even one? Not necessarily, but he's not my biggest concern. My bigger concern is rolling the transfer into 25, having Mitrovic for Wolves at home, I think it is, yeah. And then using those 2 free transfers to deal with Fernandes, who's got a blank in 25, to deal with Ake, who I'm not sure I can rely on for starts going forward, to, you know, target more double game week players. To me, that is more valuable than worrying about Mitrovic. So is he the new Weghorst? I think he's been extremely unlucky, and that happens in FPL. Are we wrong to hold on to him just because of a blank? No. I know in, you know, certain times in FPL that does happen. We latch onto a player, we feel like we can't sell them, they continue to blank. It doesn't mean it was the wrong decision. I think that's all you can really do. Do I think it's been the wrong decision to hold Mitrovic up until this point, to not sell him before Nottingham Forest at home? Absolutely not. I think that was the correct decision. As long as you're happy with the decisions you're making for your team, that's all there really is to it. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. Team selection tomorrow, once I've seen the Man City versus Arsenal game. We'll We'll do final thoughts on Friday, and of course the deadline stream on Saturday. So I'll catch you again soon.